This week on No Fear or Favor, we complete the second part of our two-part series focused on gun violence. Where last week, we focused on the problems we're seeing in the community. This week, we'll be focused on solutions, many of which are included on House File 4277 and Senate File 4324. Hello, I'm Jamel Lundy, the Intergovernmental Relations Manager for the Hennepin County Attorney's Office, fancy word for lobbyists. I served in Minnesota House of Representatives for almost 10 years. Hennepin County is the largest county in the state of Minnesota, and the Hennepin County Attorney's Office handles almost half of the state's criminal prosecutions. Follow me as I follow the action at the Capitol with No Fear or Favor. Today, on No Fear or Favor special two-part series on eliminating gun violence, we will not be coming to you from the Capitol or Hennepin County Government Center. Instead, we'll be coming to you from right here in North Minneapolis, community marred by gun violence and a community I call home.
House File 2609, as amended, does the following. It makes the Minnesota straw purchase law effective by requiring that the purchaser know or reasonably should know that the transferee is a prohibited person. This makes the standard consistent with federal law. In addition, it closes a loophole in current law that only prohibits straw purchasing for certain types of firearms. Our bill will prohibit straw purchasing for all firearms. The bill also moves the crime of straw purchasing from a gross misdemeanor to a felony. The bill requires the BCA to do a report on gun trafficking. And third, the bill bans binary triggers on guns. This bill is one more step we can take in addition to other actions taken by this committee to keep our families and law enforcement safe from gun violence. Gun violence requires a multifaceted response, and this bill closes loopholes in current laws in order to hold offenders accountable.
Where last week we focused on the question of what gaps are we seeing in community relative to gun violence prevention, this week we'll be focused primarily on the question of what can the legislature do about it. So once again, I assembled a credible group of academics, system actors, and activists to answer that question.
And at the moment, the Minnesota legislature is actually trying to tackle the questions around theft and straw purchases, and in many ways should be applauded for that. Because if you think about straw purchases as an example, anything we can do to crack down on those who are purchasing weapons knowingly to hand it to somebody else, that's an important move. We need to be putting resources into ensuring that both law enforcement but also community partners have the tools they need to be able to intervene appropriately with those who are the most high-profile offenders, who are the most embedded within the criminal networks that are using guns on the streets. And anything we can do to either divert them away from that lifestyle to get them the help and the services they need, or to enforce the laws around them to ensure that they're not using firearms illegally is really where the action is. But tied to all this, whatever we do, there also has to be resources available to evaluate what we're doing. This is always what gets missed in the equation. Area that I think is sort of interesting is there's an old adage, a kind of joke, that the police, they don't like the way it is, but they also don't like change. And so there's a challenge here about how do we get everybody on board to buy into the idea that saving lives is the mission. And we've got to do everything we possibly can to focus like a laser beam on preventing gun violence, because it is a plague on our communities. Some of the things that we're currently doing may feel like we're doing the right thing. For instance, we have a mandatory minimum sentence for possession of a firearm if you're a prohibited person. That might seem like the intuitive right thing to do. But if that law is not being enforced in a way that is consistent or is providing people with the right discretionary tools to divert people away from violence in the future, then it's not actually serving the purpose it was intended for. These are the bigger questions that I think we can put some time and resources behind. The legislature can fund that type of research, it can fund those types of changes, and I think in doing so, it can change the narrative around those issues.
There's a couple things that we're looking at this year. In particular, there's a safe storage bill this year that would require everyone who has a gun in their home to keep that gun locked up in a safe storage implement when it's not on their person. This is going to be huge in preventing child access, vulnerable adult access, and gun thefts. Another bill that we're tracking is this big gun violence prevention package that has been brought forward by Hennepin County that would do things like what we've already talked about, like get resources into the hands of folks before or just after they've committed a gun crime to make sure that they have pathways away from gun violence so that they don't go on to commit that second, that third gun crime, so that especially young people who are maybe committing acts of gun violence because they don't see resources or pathways away from gun violence have an opportunity to explore other resources before they go on to commit a repeat act of gun violence.
Pass really some common sense, targeted gun laws that go after people that are putting the weapons into our community. The second, as with anything in legislation, there needs to be funding for law enforcement and training for law enforcement and prosecutors to shift our focus and to say, these are very important societal issues. We're going to fund them, we're going to train, and we're going to really target the folks that are getting the guns out into the community. We certainly appreciate federal justice response to that with the U.S. Attorney's Office, but the reality is the day-to-day work is done by local prosecutors. The day-to-day enforcement is done by local law enforcement, and local law enforcement and local prosecutors' offices need those laws and the resources in order to address the problem appropriately.
I mean, obviously, I'm going to take a minute here to highlight the group violence intervention, which is the model that we do at the National Network for Safe Communities, known as GBI. It really focuses on identifying and recognizing that it's a very small number of people who are driving the violence in major cities across America, and that's true in Minnesota. We're working in a number of jurisdictions there, but the funding sources are just not sustainable. They're not residual, so it's hard from year to year for cities to know if they're going to have those resources to bring community, social services, and law enforcement together to look at the data and focus on those small people with both law enforcement strategies to shrink the number and social supports to help people change their behavior to get guns out of the hands of people who would use them to retaliate with youth violence.
Let's go back to funding and having personnel, not as an enforcement, but I really truly believe as an investigative force to look into some of these processes and to look at gun ownership, to look at, some of the gun stores that we need to look into. Sometimes I believe the ATF is great, but they can't do everything. I think cohesively and collaboratively, we can come together with local, state, and national organizations to curb this. But it really, truly takes funds and the ability to put the right task force together.
Have to do something. We can't just sit around and just sit back and wait for something to happen. We got to start initiating these things. Legislators have got to really get in front of this and take a chance on individuals that's doing the groundwork right now and getting out there and seeing what the community is seeing, what the community is suffering from, and the impact that it's causing on our community in a negative way. Getting out there with these different strategies that's backed up by these models and this evidence-based practices, it would be a world of difference.
Coming from the field of victim services and seeing the huge gaps that exist for victims of gun violence, victims of general crime, they need to put their votes where their words have been, right? So they say they care. They say they understand. They say that they are supportive of more advocacy services, but their votes don't follow their words. So I think right now that's the most important thing in this session that can happen. Legislators vote like they understand the issue and they want to support these victims. So we will be back next year until we can get enough resources to right now just shore up the programs that are out there. And then we want more so that we can actually develop more programming specific for general crime victims.
So we heard a whole lot of solutions today, some of which the legislature is already acting on. That would be 1, increasing the penalty on gun trafficking. This would help incentivize law enforcement to crack down on individuals supplying guns to prohibited people. And number 2, require individuals to safely store their guns. This would help in preventing suicide, and it would help in preventing lost or stolen guns from ending up in the illegal gun market. We also heard a lot of recommendations that the legislature has yet to act on. So let's talk about those. 1 would be increasing resources for gun trafficking investigations. The other would be increasing resources to victims funding and making those permanent. Another would be making the resources already available for group outreach work, for violence prevention work, permanent. Another would be fund a study into our current mandatory minimums to ensure they're functioning as we think they are. And lastly, We heard there's a need to increase resources to data-based group violence intervention cooperatives that involve law enforcement, prosecutors, and community outreach workers. We at the Hennepin County Attorney's Office take gun violence seriously, which is why we listen to the experts who are both from the academic field and the field of being a system actor. We took these recommendations and compiled them into a bill, House File 4277 and Senate File 4324. We are hopeful that the legislature, either this session or the next, will act on this bill to ensure that we look at gun violence. Thank you so much for listening to this two-part series on gun violence. And this has been Jamel Lundy from the Hennepin County Attorney's Office, right here on Broadway for No Fear of Favor.